In the swirling chaos of 15th century England, one man stood taller than the rest. His name was Richard Neville, the Earl of Warwick, but history knows him by another name, the Kingmaker. This was not a title he was born with. It was a name he earned through ambition, power, and, honestly, brute force. Warwick was the ultimate political operator in an age of savage violence and shifting loyalties. He was immensely wealthy, owning vast estates across England. He was also a charismatic and skilled military commander, a man his soldiers would follow into the very jaws of hell. His influence was so great that he could raise armies, challenge kings, and for a time, hold the destiny of the entire kingdom in his powerful hands. He was a product of his time, a brutal and unforgiving era known as the Wars of the Roses. The Wars of the Roses was not a simple war between two families. It was a complex and bloody civil conflict that tore England apart for decades. The two rival branches of the royal Plantagenet family, the House of Lancaster, represented by the Red Rose, and the House of York, symbolized by the White Rose, fought for the ultimate prize, the crown of England. In this dangerous game, Warwick was a master player. He understood that power didn't just come from noble birthright, it came from controlling the king. If you could control the king, you could control the kingdom. Warwick's story is a dramatic tale of loyalty, betrayal, and the relentless pursuit of power, showing just how one man's ambition could shape the fate of a nation. Warwick's power base was formidable. Through inheritance and a strategic marriage to Anne de Beauchamp, he became the richest nobleman in England, second only to the king himself. His lands were not just scattered parcels. They were a network of castles, towns, and loyal tenants that stretched across the country, giving him a reach that no other lord could match. When Warwick called for men to fight, they came in their thousands. He was also captain of Calais, England's last and most important stronghold in France. This position gave him control of England's only professional standing army, a force of hardened veterans who were loyal to him personally, not necessarily to the crown. This gave him a military edge that made him both a valuable ally and a terrifying enemy. This combination of immense wealth, personal charisma, and military might made Warwick the central figure of his age. He was a political heavyweight, a man whose support could make a king and whose opposition could break one. He moved through the treacherous landscape of the Wars of the Roses with a confidence that bordered on arrogance. He believed he had the right to guide the kingdom's destiny, to place the crown on the head of the man he deemed most worthy, or more accurately, the man who would best serve his own interests. This belief would lead him to the pinnacle of power, but it would also set him on a collision course with the very king he helped create, leading to one of the most dramatic and violent chapters in English history. The Wars of the Roses had been raging for years. The Lancastrian king, Henry VI, was a weak and ineffective ruler. He suffered from bouts of mental illness that left him incapable of governing. His kingdom was poorly managed, plagued by lawlessness, and his court was dominated by his formidable wife, Margaret of Anjou. It was in this climate of instability that a new contender emerged from the House of York, the young, dynamic, and incredibly handsome Edward, Earl of March. He was the son of Richard, Duke of York, who had first challenged the Lancastrian regime and died for his cause. Edward was everything Henry VI was not. He was tall, powerful, and a brilliant military leader. He had a natural charm that won people over, a king who looked and acted like a king. Warwick the Kingmaker saw in Edward the perfect weapon to achieve his goals. The Nevilles had long been at odds with the powerful families who supported the Lancastrian throne, and Warwick believed that a change in regime was necessary for his own survival and for the good of the realm. He threw his immense resources, his political influence, and his military might behind the young Yorkist claimant. Warwick became Edward's mentor, his chief advisor, and his most powerful ally. Together they formed a formidable partnership. Warwick provided the political machinery and the vast armies, while Edward provided the royal blood, the charisma, and the battlefield prowess. It was a match made in heaven for a kingdom torn apart by war. The decisive moment came in the brutal winter of 1461. After a series of bloody battles, the Yorkist and Lancastrian armies met in the middle of a blinding snowstorm at a place called Towton. The Battle of Towton was the largest and bloodiest battle ever fought on English soil. It was a horrific meat grinder, a relentless and savage struggle where tens of thousands of men fought hand-to-hand for hours. With Warwick's strategic guidance and Edward's inspirational leadership on the front lines, the Yorkists won a crushing victory. The Lancastrian army was annihilated, and King Henry VI and his family were forced to flee. The path to the throne was now clear for the young Yorkist leader. With the Lancastrians scattered and defeated, Warwick's plan came to fruition. He marched into London with his victorious young protégé, and, with popular support, had him proclaimed King Edward IV. At the age of just 18, Edward was now the ruler of England. Warwick stood beside him, the power behind the throne. He had successfully placed his man on the throne, earning his famous nickname the Kingmaker. For a time, their partnership seemed unstoppable. They had won the war and secured the crown. Warwick believed he would now be the one to guide the new king, to shape England's policies, and to reap the rewards of his loyalty. He had made a king, but he would soon learn that controlling one was a different matter entirely. For the first few years of Edward IV's reign, the alliance with Warwick held strong. Warwick was the most powerful man in the kingdom, second only to the king himself. He effectively ran the government, directing foreign policy and managing the affairs of the state. He saw himself as the senior partner in this arrangement, the wise and experienced hand guiding the young king. Warwick's grand plan was to secure the new Yorkist dynasty by forging a powerful alliance with England's traditional enemy, France. He spent months in complex negotiations, working to arrange a marriage between King Edward and a French princess, Bona of Savoy. This marriage would bring peace, legitimacy, and international recognition to Edward's still fragile throne. Warwick was a master of diplomacy and believed this French match was his masterstroke. It would cement his own position as England's foremost statesman and secure the future of the kingdom. He staked his reputation on it, promising the French king, Louis XI, that the deal was all but done. In Warwick's mind, the king's marriage was a matter of state, not a matter of the heart. It was a tool of foreign policy, and as the chief architect of that policy, he believed he had the right to decide who Edward would marry. He saw the young king as his protégé, someone who would naturally follow his expert advice on such a crucial matter. He was about to receive a very rude awakening that would shake his world to its core. While Warwick was busy in France, negotiating the royal wedding, King Edward IV did something completely unexpected and reckless. He fell in love. The object of his affection was a woman named Elizabeth Woodville. She was a widow, 5 years older than the king, and she had 2 sons from her first marriage. More importantly, she was a commoner by royal standards, from a relatively minor gentry family with Lancastrian connections. By the standards of the day, she was a completely unsuitable bride for a king. But Edward was captivated by her beauty and strong will. In May 1464, he married her in a secret ceremony, with only a handful of witnesses present. He had followed his heart, not his head. When Warwick returned to England, ready to present the French marriage proposal to the King's Council, he was met with a bombshell. Edward calmly announced that he was already married. Warwick was utterly humiliated. He had been made to look like a fool in front of the entire French court. The king had not only rejected his carefully laid plans, but had done so behind his back, undermining his authority and making a mockery of his efforts. This secret marriage was not just a personal insult to Warwick, it was a political disaster. It destroyed the possibility of a French alliance and opened the door for a host of new problems. The crack in the alliance between the king and the Kingmaker had appeared, and it would soon grow into a chasm. The secret marriage was just the beginning of Warwick's problems. Now that Elizabeth Woodville was queen, she brought her large and ambitious family with her to court. The Woodvilles were a hungry clan with 5 brothers and 7 unmarried sisters, all eager to take advantage of their newfound royal connection. King Edward, besotted with his new wife, showered her family with titles, lands, and lucrative positions. More importantly, he arranged a series of advantageous marriages for them, pairing them off with some of the wealthiest and most powerful heirs and heiresses in the kingdom. These were the very marriages that Warwick had hoped to secure for his own daughters and supporters, the traditional rewards for loyal service. This rapid rise of the Woodville family, known as the Woodville Ascendancy, created a new power faction at court that was loyal only to the Queen and the King. Suddenly, Warwick found himself being pushed aside. His advice was ignored and his influence began to wane. The king, who had once relied on him for everything, was now surrounded by this new clique of upstarts. Warwick, the great earl who had put Edward on the throne, had to watch as the Woodvilles, whom he saw as grasping nobodies, collected all the prizes. It was a bitter pill to swallow. He felt that the king was ungrateful and that his rightful place at the center of power was being usurped by these newcomers. The Woodvilles and Warwick were natural rivals. Warwick favored a policy of peace and alliance with France, while the Woodvilles, through their marriage ties to the Duke of Burgundy, pushed for an alliance with England's other great continental rival. This created a deep division in Edward's court over foreign policy. Every political decision became a struggle between the old guard, led by Warwick, and the new Woodville faction. The king, instead of managing these tensions, seemed to consistently side with his wife's family. Warwick's frustration grew into a burning resentment. He saw the king as a puppet, not of him but of his new queen and her power-hungry relatives. This growing animosity was about more than just hurt pride or political disagreement. Warwick saw the king's actions as a fundamental betrayal. He had risked everything to make Edward king, and he expected to be rewarded with trust and power. Instead, he was being marginalized. The king he had created was now acting independently, making his own decisions and building his own power base. For a man like Warwick, who was accustomed to being in control, this was an intolerable situation. He began to believe that if Edward would not be the king he wanted him to be, then perhaps it was time to find a new one. The stage was being set for a dramatic and violent confrontation. Feeling betrayed and sidelined, Warwick began to look for a way to regain his lost influence. He realized that simply complaining to the king was honestly pretty useless. He needed a new plan, a new gambit to put himself back at the center of power. His eyes soon fell upon a new potential pawn in his game: George, Duke of Clarence, King Edward IV's own younger brother. Clarence was ambitious, arrogant, and, well, deeply resentful of the king. He felt that he, as the king's brother, was being overlooked in favor of the Queen's Woodville relatives. He was jealous, really jealous, of the power and wealth they were accumulating and believed he deserved a greater share of the spoils. In many ways, he was the perfect disgruntled ally for the vengeful Earl of Warwick. Warwick secretly reached out to Clarence, playing on his insecurities and stoking the fires of his ambition. He hatched a daring and, honestly, treasonous plan. He offered Clarence something he desperately wanted: a marriage to his eldest daughter, Isabel Neville. This was a hugely significant offer. Isabel was one of the greatest heiresses in England, and a marriage to her would make Clarence immensely rich and powerful. However, King Edward had explicitly forbidden this marriage, seeing it as a dangerous concentration of power in the hands of his already overmighty brother and his increasingly difficult earl. For Warwick and Clarence to proceed with the marriage would be an open act of defiance against the king. In July 1469, they decided to act. Defying the king's direct orders, Warwick and Clarence sailed to Calais, the fortress city that Warwick commanded. There, in a grand ceremony, Clarence married Isabel Neville. This was more than just a wedding. It was the sealing of a political alliance and a declaration of rebellion. Immediately after the wedding, Warwick issued a manifesto, a public declaration denouncing King Edward's rule. He accused the king of being controlled by the deceitful and covetous Woodville family, blaming them for high taxes, lawlessness, and bad governance. It was a clever piece of propaganda, designed to turn the people against the king and legitimize their own treasonous actions. With their alliance sealed and their intentions declared, Warwick and Clarence prepared for war. They had a royal prince on their side in Clarence, which gave their rebellion a veneer of legitimacy. Warwick used his vast network to raise an army in the north of England, stirring up a rebellion under the leadership of a mysterious figure known as Robin of Redesdale. Their plan was simple, and honestly pretty audacious. They would use this northern army to challenge the king, remove the Woodvilles from power, and force Edward to bend to their will. The Kingmaker was no longer content to be a servant of the crown. He was now prepared to master it by force. The game had turned deadly. With Warwick and Clarence still in Calais, their carefully orchestrated rebellion began to unfold in England. The Northern Army, raised in Warwick's name, marched south, gathering support as it went. King Edward IV, initially slow to react, finally understood the gravity of the threat. He began to assemble his own royal army to confront the rebels. However, he had underestimated the speed and organization of Warwick's plan. The king's forces were scattered, with a large contingent from Wales under the Earl of Pembroke, and another army being raised by the king himself in the Midlands. The rebels aimed to defeat these royal armies separately before they could unite. The two sides clashed on the 26th of July, 1469, near Banbury, in a conflict that would become known as the Battle of Edgecote Moor. The Royalist army, led by the Earl of Pembroke, was tired and disorganized. They had made camp in a poor position, and a dispute between Pembroke and another Royalist commander, the Earl of Devon, had led to Devon withdrawing his crucial contingent of archers. The rebels, on the other hand, were fresh, motivated, and well-led. They seized the initiative and launched a fierce attack on Pembroke's outnumbered and exposed Welshmen. The battle was a brutal and one-sided affair, really a testament to the effectiveness of Warwick's planning. The result was a catastrophic defeat for the king. The Royalist army was crushed and thousands were killed or captured. The Earl of Pembroke and his brother were both captured and, on Warwick's orders, executed shortly after the battle. This was a ruthless move, designed to send a clear message to the king's supporters. Just a few days later, Warwick's men tracked down and captured the Queen's father, Earl Rivers, and her brother, John Woodville. They too were summarily executed without trial. Warwick was systematically eliminating his enemies, targeting the Woodville family that he blamed for all his troubles. He was clearing the board, piece by bloody piece. In the aftermath of the battle, King Edward himself was captured. He had been isolated from his main army and was taken by surprise near Coventry. The Kingmaker had achieved the unthinkable. He had defeated the king's army, executed his chief rivals, and now held the king himself as his prisoner. Warwick was in complete control. He had the king in a cage, and for a brief moment, it seemed his gambit had paid off, spectacularly. He brought Edward back to his castle at Middleham, the very place where Edward had spent much of his youth under Warwick's tutelage. The Kingmaker had unmade his king, and now he intended to rule through him as a puppet. Warwick's triumph was short-lived. He quickly discovered that capturing a king was much easier than ruling in his name. With Edward imprisoned, law and order across England collapsed. Without a king on the throne to provide authority, old feuds reignited and a wave of private warfare swept the country. Warwick's fellow nobles, even those who disliked the Woodvilles, were not prepared to accept him as the de facto ruler of England. They refused to take orders from an earl who had imprisoned his rightful sovereign. Warwick's authority, which he thought was absolute, proved to be an illusion. He could not govern the kingdom alone. He needed the king, but a king he could control. Faced with a kingdom spiraling into anarchy and his own powerlessness, Warwick was forced to release Edward IV from captivity. It was a humiliating climb down. He had to patch together a fragile truce with the king he had just overthrown. For a few months, an uneasy peace settled over the court, but the trust between the two men was shattered forever. Edward was simply biding his time, waiting for an opportunity to strike back. That opportunity came in 1470, when Warwick and Clarence tried to stir up another rebellion. This time, Edward was ready. He acted decisively, routing the rebels at a battle known as Edgecote Field, and forcing Warwick and Clarence to flee the country for their lives. Now desperate exiles, Warwick and Clarence sailed to France, seeking refuge at the court of King Louis XI. It was here that the most cynical and unbelievable political maneuver of the entire Wars of the Roses took place. Louis XI, a master of political intrigue, saw an opportunity to sow chaos in England. He brokered a reconciliation between his two bitterest enemies, Warwick the Kingmaker and the exiled Lancastrian queen, Margaret of Anjou. It was an alliance born of pure desperation and mutual hatred for Edward IV. Warwick, the man who had destroyed the Lancastrian dynasty, now swore allegiance to it. To seal the pact, Warwick's younger daughter, Anne Neville, was betrothed to Margaret's son, the Lancastrian Prince of Wales, Edward of Westminster. With French backing, Warwick launched his final, audacious gamble. In the autumn of 1470, he landed in England with a small army. Edward IV was caught completely off guard. Many of his key supporters, including Warwick's own brother, Lord Montague, switched sides and declared for the Lancastrians. Betrayed and outnumbered, Edward IV had no choice but to flee. He took a ship and escaped to Burgundy, the home of his brother-in-law. In a stunning reversal of fortune, Warwick marched into London, freed the frail and bewildered Henry VI from the Tower of London, and placed him back on the throne. This brief restoration of Lancastrian rule became known as the Readeption. The Kingmaker had done it again. He had unmade one king and remade another. Warwick was once again the master of England, ruling in the name of the mentally fragile Henry VI. However, his new government was built on a foundation of sand. His alliance with the Lancastrians was deeply unpopular, and his partner, the Duke of Clarence, felt cheated. Clarence had joined the rebellion, hoping to become king himself, not to restore the family his own house had overthrown. He was a Yorkist prince, trapped in a Lancastrian regime, and his loyalty was wafer thin. Meanwhile, in exile, Edward IV was not idle. With financial and military support from his brother-in-law, Charles the Bold, Duke of Burgundy, he began to plan his return. Edward was a formidable warrior, and he was not about to give up his kingdom without a fight. In March 1471, Edward IV landed back in England with a small but determined force. He marched south, cleverly avoiding a direct confrontation and gathering support as he went. Crucially, his treacherous brother, the Duke of Clarence, saw which way the wind was blowing and abandoned Warwick. He reconciled with Edward, bringing his own troops with him and significantly strengthening the Yorkist army. With his brothers reunited, Edward marched confidently on London. The city, which had little love for Warwick's new regime, opened its gates to him. Edward once again had his capital, and he placed the unfortunate Henry VI back in the Tower of London. The stage was set for a final, decisive confrontation with Warwick. The two armies met on Easter Sunday, the 14th of April, 1471, at Barnet, just north of London. The battle was fought in a thick, dense fog. In the confusion, one of Warwick's Lancastrian divisions, commanded by the Earl of Oxford, got disoriented and accidentally attacked another Lancastrian division, mistaking their banner for Edward's. Cries of treason rang out through the Lancastrian lines, causing panic and collapse. In the chaos, Warwick himself was caught as he tried to flee the field. He was cut down and killed. The Kingmaker's game was over. His body was displayed publicly in London to prove that the great Earl was truly dead and that his power was broken for good. But the war was not quite over. On the very day of the Battle of Barnet, Margaret of Anjou and her son, Prince Edward, finally landed in England. with their own army. Hearing of Warwick's defeat and death, they tried to retreat to the safety of Wales. But King Edward IV, relentless in his pursuit, intercepted them at Tewkesbury on the 4th of May, 1471. The Battle of Tewkesbury was a final brutal slaughter. The Lancastrian army was utterly destroyed. The Lancastrian heir, Prince Edward of Westminster, was killed either in the battle or executed shortly after. With his death, the direct line of the House of Lancaster was extinguished. Margaret of Anjou was captured, and a few weeks later, King Henry VI died in the Tower of London, almost certainly murdered on Edward IV's orders. The Red Rose was finished. With the deaths of Warwick, Prince Edward of Westminster and Henry VI, the game had fundamentally changed. Edward IV was now the undisputed King of England. He had not only reclaimed his throne, but had systematically eliminated every single one of his Lancastrian rivals. The series of bloody events in the spring of 1471, the battles of Barnet and Tewkesbury and the death of Henry VI, marked a decisive turning point in the Wars of the Roses. For the first time in over a decade, there was only one king and one clear line of succession. The civil war that had plagued England for so long seemed to be finally over. Edward's victory was total and absolute. The fall of Warwick the Kingmaker represented the end of an era. It was the end of the over-mighty subject, the powerful nobleman who could challenge the crown itself. Warwick's career had shown the immense danger of a subject whose personal power, wealth, and military strength rivaled that of the king. Edward IV had learned this lesson the hard way. He had been made king by Warwick, only to be unmade and almost destroyed by him. After his restoration in 1471, Edward made sure that no single nobleman would ever be allowed to accumulate that much power again. He built a new kind of monarchy, one that was less reliant on a few great lords and more centralized around the king himself. Edward IV's second reign was a period of relative peace and prosperity. He restored royal authority, replenished the crown's finances, and enforced law and order with a firm hand. He ruled effectively for another 12 years, securing his dynasty and providing the stability that England desperately needed. He had won the brutal Game of Thrones not just through military genius, but by learning from his mistakes. He had survived betrayal, exile, and defeat, and emerged stronger and more ruthless. His victory ensured that the House of York would rule England, and it laid the groundwork for a stronger, more modern form of kingship that would be further developed by the Tudors who followed. The story of Warwick, the Kingmaker, is a cautionary tale about ambition and the perils of power. He was a man of immense talent and charisma who rose to become the most powerful man in England, but his refusal to be a servant rather than a master led to his downfall. In his desperate attempts to control the crown, he unleashed years of chaos and bloodshed, ultimately destroying himself and the old order he represented. Edward IV's final victory was not just a personal triumph, it was a victory for the principle of monarchy itself. It signaled that the king, and not the kingmaker, would be the ultimate authority in the land, a decisive shift that would shape the future of the English nation for centuries to come.